Section 1 of Animal Heroes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Slum Cat, Life 1. Section 1. Meat, meat, came shrilling down Scrimper's alley. Surely the Pied Piper of Hamelin was there, for it seemed that all the cats in the neighborhood were running toward the sound, though the dogs, it must be confessed, looked scornfully indifferent. Meat! Meat! And louder. Then the center of attraction came into view, a rough, dirty little man with a push-cart, while straggling behind him were a score of cats that joined in his cry with a sound nearly the same as his own. Every 50 yards, that is, as soon as a goodly throng of cats was gathered, the push-cart stopped. The man with the magic voice took out of the box in his cart a skewer on which were pieces of strong-smelling boiled liver. With a long stick he pushed the pieces off. Each cat seized one, and wheeling with a slight depression of his ears and a little tiger growl and glare, she rushed away with her prize to devour it in some safe retreat. Meat! Meat! And still they came to get their portions. All were well known to the meat man. There was Castiglione's tiger. This was Jones's black. Here was Perlinsky's torkershell, and this was Madame Danton's white. There sneaked Blenkinshoff's Maltese, and that, climbing on the barrow, was Sawyer's old Orange Billy, an impudent fraud that had never had any financial backing. All to be remembered and kept in account. This one's owner was sure to pay a dime a week. That one's doubtful. There was John Washy's cat. That got only a small piece because John was in arrears. Then there was the saloon-keeper's collared and ribboned ratter, which got an extra lump because the barkeep was liberal. And the round man's cat, that brought no cash, but got unusual consideration because the meat man did. But there were others. A black cat with a white nose came rushing confidently with the rest, only to be repulsed savagely. Alas, Pussy did not understand. She had been a pensioner of the barrow for months. Why this unkind change? It was beyond her comprehension, but the meat man knew. Her mistress had stopped payment. The meat man kept no books but his memory, and it was never at fault. Outside this patrician 400 about the barrow were other cats, keeping away from the push-cart because they were not on the list, the social register, as it were, yet fascinated by the heavenly smell and the faint possibility of accidental good luck. Among these hangers-on was a thin gray slummer, a homeless cat that lived by her wits, slab-sided and not over-clean. One could see at a glance that she was doing her duty by a family in some out-of-the-way corner. She kept one eye on the barrow circle and the other on the possible dogs. She saw a score of happy cats slink off with their delicious daily and their tiger-like air, but no opening for her, till a big Tom of her own class sprang on a little pensioner with intent to rob. The victim dropped the meat to defend herself against the enemy, and before the all-powerful could intervene, the gray slummer saw her chance, seized the prize, and was gone. She went through the hole in Minzy's side door and over the wall at the back, then sat down and devoured the lump of liver, licked her chops, felt absolutely happy, and set out by devious ways to the rubbish yard where, in the bottom of an old cracker box, her family was awaiting her. A plaintive mewing reached her ears. She went at speed and reached the box to see a huge black tomcat calmly destroying her brood. He was twice as big as she, but she went at him with all her strength, and he did as most animals will do when caught wrong-doing. He turned and ran away. Only one was left, a little thing like its mother, but of more pronounced color, gray with black spots and a white touch on her nose, ears, and tail-tip. There can be no question of the mother's grief for a few days, but that wore off, and all her care was for the survivor. That benevolence was as far as possible from the motives of the murderous old Tom there can be no doubt, but he proved a blessing in the deep disguise, for both mother and kit were visibly bettered in a short time. The daily quest for food continued. The meat man rarely proved a success, but the ash cans were there, and if they did not afford a meat supply, at least they were sure to produce potato skins that could be used to allay the gripe of hunger for another day. One night the mother Cat smelt a wonderful smell that came from the East River at the end of the alley. A new smell always needed investigating, and when it is attractive as well as new, there is but one course open. It led Pussy to the docks a block away, and then out on a wharf, away from any cover but the night. A sudden noise, a growl and a rush, were the first notice she had that she was cut off by her old enemy, the wharf dog. There was only one escape. She leaped from the wharf to the vessel from which the smell came. The dog could not follow, so when the fish boat sailed in the morning, Pussy unwillingly went with her and was seen no more. Section 2. The Slum Kitten waited in vain for her mother. The next morning came and went. She became very hungry. Toward evening a deep-laid instinct drove her forth to seek food. She slunk out of the old box, and feeling her way silently among the rubbish, she smelt everything that seemed eatable, but without finding food. At length she reached the wooden steps leading down into Jap Malay's bird store underground. The door was open a little. She wandered into a world of rank and curious smells, and a number of living things in cages all about her. A negro was sitting idly on a box in a corner. He saw the little stranger enter and watched it curiously. It wandered past some rabbits. They paid no heed. It came to a wide barred cage in which was a fox. The gentleman with the bushy tail was in a far corner. He crouched low. His eyes glowed. The kitten wandered, sniffing, up to the bars, put its head in, sniffed again, and then made toward the feed pan to be seized in a flash by the crouching fox. It gave a frightened mew, but a single shake cut that short and would have ended Kitty's 9 lives at once had not the negro come to the rescue. He had no weapon and could not get into the cage, but he spat with such copious vigor in the fox's face that he dropped the kitten and returned to the corner, there to sit blinking his eye in sullen fear. The negro pulled the kitten out. The shake of the beast of prey seemed to have stunned the victim, really to have saved it much suffering. The kitten seemed unharmed, but giddy. It tottered in a circle for a time, then slowly revived, and a few minutes later was purring in the negro's lap, apparently none the worse, when Jap Malay, the birdman, came home. Jap was not an Oriental. He was a full-blooded Cockney, but his eyes were such that little accidental slits aslant in his round, flat face that his first name was forgotten in the highly descriptive title of Jap. He was not especially unkind to the birds and beasts whose sale were supposed to furnish his living, but his eye was on the main chance. He knew what he wanted. He didn't want the Slum Kitten. The negro gave it all the food it could eat, then carried it to a distant block and dropped it into a neighboring iron yard. Section 3. One full meal is as much as anyone needs in 2 or 3 days, and under the influence of this stored up heat and power Kitty was very lively. She walked around the piled up rubbish, cast curious glances on far away canary birds in cages that hung from high windows. She peeped over fences, discovered a large dog, got quietly down again, and presently finding a sheltered place in full sunlight, she lay down and slept for an hour. A slight sniff awakened her, and before her stood a large black cat with glowing green eyes and the thick neck and square jaw that distinguished the Tom. A scar marked his cheek, and his left ear was torn. His look was far from friendly. His ears moved backward a little, his tail twitched, and a faint, deep sound came from his throat. The kitten innocently walked toward him. She did not remember him. He rubbed the sides of his jaws on a post and quietly, slowly turned and disappeared. The last that she saw of him was the end of his tail twitching from side to side, and the little slummer had no idea that she had been as near death today as she had been when she ventured into the fox cage. As night came on, the kitten began to feel hungry. She examined carefully the long invisible colored stream that the wind is made of. She selected the most interesting of its strands, and, nose led, followed. In the corner of the yarnyard was a box of garbage. Among this she found something that answered fairly well for food. A bucket of water under a faucet offered a chance to quench her thirst. The night was spent chiefly in prowling about and learning the main lines of the ironyard. The next day she passed as before, sleeping in the sun. Thus the time wore on. Sometimes she found a good meal at the garbage box. Sometimes there was nothing. Once she found the big black Tom there, but discreetly withdrew before he saw her. The water bucket was usually at its place, or, failing that, there were some muddy little pools on the stone below. But the garbage box was very unreliable. Once it left her for 3 days without food. She searched along the high fence, and seeing a small hole, crawled through that and found herself in the open street. This was a new world. But before she had ventured far, there was a noisy, rumbling rush. A large dog came bounding, and Kitty had barely time to run back into the hole in the fence. She was dreadfully hungry, and glad to find some old potato peelings which gave a little respite to the hunger pains. In the morning she did not sleep, but prowled for food. Some sparrows chirped in the yard. They were often there, but now they were viewed with new eyes. The steady pressure of hunger had roused the wild hunter in the kitten. Those sparrows were game, were food. She crouched instinctively and stalked from cover to cover. But the chirpers were alert and flew in time. Not once, but many times she tried without results except to confirm the sparrows in the list of things to be eaten if obtainable. On the 5th day of ill luck the Slum Kitty ventured forth into the streets, desperately bent on finding food. When far from the haven hole some small boys opened fire at her with pieces of brick. She ran in fear. A dog joined in the chase, and Kitty's position grew perilous. But an old-fashioned iron fence round a house front was there, and she slipped in between the rails as the dog overtook her. A woman in the window above shouted at the dog. Then the boys dropped a piece of cat meat down to the unfortunate, and Kitty had the most delicious meal of her life. The stoop afforded a refuge. Under this she sat patiently till nightfall came with quiet, then sneaked back like a shadow to her old iron yard. Thus the days went by for 2 months. She grew in size and strength, and in an intimate knowledge of the immediate neighborhood. She made the acquaintance of Downing Street, where long rows of ash cans were to be seen every morning. She formed her own ideas of their proprietors. The big house was to her not a Roman Catholic mission, but a place whose garbage tins abounded in the choicest fish scrapings. She soon made the acquaintance of the meat man, and joined in the shy fringe of cats that formed the outer circle. She also met the wharf dog as well as 2 or 3 other horrors of the same class. She knew what to expect of them and how to avoid them, and she was happy in being the inventor of a new industry. Many thousand cats have doubtless hung in hope about the tempting milk cans that the early milkman leaves on steps and window ledges, and it was by the merest accident that Kitty found one with a broken lid, and so was taught to raise it and have a satisfying drink. Bottles, of course, were beyond her, but many a can has a misfit lid, and Kitty was very painstaking in her efforts to discover the loose-jointed ones. Finally she extended her range by exploration till she achieved the heart of the next block, and farther, till one more among the barrels and boxes of the yard behind the birdman's cellar. The old iron yard never had been home. She'd always felt like a stranger there. But here she had a sense of ownership, and at once resented the presence of another small cat. She approached this newcomer with threatening air. The two had got as far as snarling and spitting when a bucket of water from an upper window drenched them both and effectually cooled their wrath. They fled, the newcomer over the wall, Slum Kitty under the very box where she had been born. This whole back region appealed to her strongly, and here again she took up her abode. The yard had no more garbage food than the other, and no water at all, but it was frequented by stray rats and a few mice of the finest quality. These were occasionally secured, and afforded not only a palatable meal, but were the cause of her winning a friend. Section 4. Kitty was now fully grown. She was a striking-looking cat of the tiger type. Her marks were black on a very pale gray, and the 4 beauty spots of white on nose, ears, and tail tip lent a certain distinction. She was very expert at getting a living, and yet she had some days of starvation and failed in an ambition of catching a sparrow. She was quite alone, but a new force was coming into her life. She was lying in the sun one August day when a large black cat came walking along at the top of a wall in her direction. She recognized him at once by his torn ear. She slunk into her box and hid. He picked his way gingerly, bounded lightly to a shed that was at the end of the yard, and was crossing the roof when a yellow cat rose up. The black Tom glared and growled. So did the yellow Tom. Their tails lashed from side to side. Strong throats growled and yowled. They approached each other with ears laid back, with muscles tense. "Yow!" said the black one. "Wow!" was the slightly deeper answer. "Yow! Wow! Wow! Wow!" said the black one, edging up half an inch nearer. "Yow!" was the yellow answer, as the blond cat rose to full height and stepped with vast dignity a whole inch forward. "Yow!" and he went another inch, while his tail went swish, thump from one side to the other. "Yow! Yow!" screamed the black in a rising tone, and he backed the eighth of an inch as he marked the broad, unshrinking breast before him. Windows opened all around, human voices were heard, but the cat scene went on. "Yow! Yow! Yow!" rumbled the yellow peril, his voice deepening as the others rose. "Yow!" and he advanced another step. Now their noses were but 3 inches apart. They stood sidewise, both ready to clinch, but each waiting for the other. They glared for 3 minutes in silence and like statues, except that each tail tip was twisting. The yellow began again. "Yow!" in deep tone. "Yeah!" screamed the black with intent to strike terror by his yell, but he retreated 1/16 of an inch. The yellow walked up a long half inch. Their whiskers were mixing now. Another advance, and their noses almost touched. "Yow!" said the yellow like a deep moan. "Yeah!" screamed the black, but he retreated a 32nd of an inch, and the yellow warrior closed and clenched like a demon. Oh, how they rolled and bit and tore, especially the yellow one! How they pinched and gripped and hugged, but especially the yellow one! Over and over, sometimes one on top, sometimes another, but mostly the yellow one, and farther till they rolled off the roof amid cheers from all the windows. They lost not a second in that fall to the junkyard. They tore and clawed all the way down, but especially the yellow one, and when they struck the ground still fighting, the one on top was chiefly the yellow one, and before they separated both had had as much as they wanted, especially the black one. He scaled a wall, and bleating and growling, disappeared, while the news was passed from window to window that Cayley's nig had been licked at last by Orange Billy. Either the yellow cat was a very clever seeker, or else Slum Kitty did not hide very hard. But he discovered her among the boxes, and she made no attempt to get away, probably because she had witnessed the fight. There is nothing like success in warfare to win the female heart, and thereafter the yellow Tom and Kitty became very good friends, not sharing each other's lives or food, cats do not do that way much, but recognizing each other as entitled to special friendly privileges. Section 5. September had gone. October's shortening days were on when an event took place in the old cracker box. If Orange Billy had come, he would have seen 5 little kittens curled up in the embrace of their mother, the little slum cat. It was a wonderful thing for her. She felt all the elation an animal mother can feel, all the delight, and she loved them and licked them with a tenderness that must have been a surprise to herself had she had the power to think such things. She had added a joy to her joyless life, but she had also added a care and a heavy weight to her heavy load. All her strength was taken now to find food. The burden increased as the offspring grew up big enough to scramble about the box, which they did daily during her absence after they were 6 weeks old. That troubles go in flocks and luck in streaks is well known in slumland. Kitty had had 3 encounters with dogs, and had been stoned by Maylie's negro during a 2-day starve. Then the tide turned. The very next morning she found a full milk can without a lid, successfully robbed a barrow pensioner, and found a big fish head all within 2 hours. She had just returned with that perfect peace which comes only with a full stomach, when she saw a little brown creature in her junk yard. Hunting memories came back in strength. She didn't know what it was, but she had killed and eaten several mice, and this was evidently a big mouse with bobtail and large ears. Kitty stalked it with elaborate but unnecessary caution. The little rabbit simply sat up and looked faintly amused. He did not try to run, and Kitty sprang on him and bore him off. As she was not hungry, she carried him into the cracker box and dropped him among the kittens. He was not much hurt. He got over his fright, and since he could not get out of the box, he snuggled among the kittens, and when they began to take their evening meal, he very soon decided to join them. The old cat was puzzled. The hunter instinct had been dominant, but absence of hunger had saved the rabbit and given the maternal instinct a chance to appear. The result was that the rabbit became a member of the family, and was thenceforth guarded and fed with the kittens. 2 weeks went by. The kittens romped much more among the boxes during their mother's absence. The rabbit could not get out of the box. Jap Malie, seeing the kittens about the backyard, told the negro to shoot them. This he was doing one morning with a 22 caliber rifle. He had shot one after another and seen them drop from sight into the crannies of the lumber pile, when the old cat came running along the wall from the dock, carrying a small wharf rat. He had been ready to shoot her, too, but the sight of the rat changed his plans. A rat-catching cat was worthy to live. It happened to be the very first one she had ever caught, but it saved her life. She threaded the lumber maze to the cracker box, and was probably puzzled to find that there were no kittens to come at her call, and the rabbit would not partake of the rat. Pussy curled up to nurse the rabbit, but she called from time to time to summon the kittens. Guided by the call, the negro crawled quietly to the place, and peering down into the cracker box, saw to his intense surprise that it contained the old cat, a live rabbit, and a dead rat. The mother cat laid back her ears and snarled. The negro withdrew, but a minute later a board was dropped on the opening of the cracker box, and the den with its tenants, dead and alive, was lifted into the bird cellar. "Say, boss, look a here. Here's where de little rabbit got to what we lost. You shore thought I stole him for der tater bake." Kitty and Bunny were carefully put in a large wire cage and exhibited as a happy family till a few days later, when the rabbit took sick and died. Pussy had never been happy in the cage. She had enough to eat and drink, but she craved her freedom. Would likely have gotten death or liberty now, but that during the 4-day captivity she had so cleaned and slicked her fur that her usual coloring was seen, and Jap decided to keep her. End of section 1. Recording by Jenny Blankenship, Culloden, West Virginia. Section 2 of Animal Heroes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jenny Blankenship, Culloden, West Virginia. The Slum Cat, Life 2. Section 6. Jap Malie was a disreputable little cockney bantam as ever sold cheap canary birds in a cellar. He was extremely poor, and the negro lived with him because the Englishman was willing to share a bed and board, and otherwise admit a perfect equality that few Americans conceded. Jap was perfectly honest according to his lights, but he hadn't any lights, and it was well known that his chief revenue was derived from storing and restoring stolen dogs and cats. The half-dozen canaries were merely blinds. Yet Jap believed in himself. "I tell you, Sammy, me boy, you'll see me with 'orses of my own yet," he would say, when some trifling success inflated his dirty little chest. He was not without ambition in a weak, flabby, once-in-a-while way, and he sometimes wished to be known as a fancier. Indeed, he had once gone the wild length of offering a cat for exhibition at the Knickerbocker High Society Cat and Pet Show, with three not over clear objects. First, to gratify his ambition; second, to secure the exhibitor's free pass; and third, well, as one ought to know the valuable cats, when one goes a catting. But this was a society show. The exhibitor had to be introduced, and his miserable alleged half Persian was scornfully rejected. The lost and found columns of the paper were the only ones of interest to Jap, but he had noticed and saved a clipping about breeding for fur. This was stuck on the wall of his den, and under its influence he set about what seemed a cruel experiment with the slum cat. First, he soaked her dirty fur with stuff to kill the 2 or 3 kinds of creepers she wore, and when it had done its work, he washed her thoroughly in soap and warm water, in spite of her teeth, claws, and yowls. Kitty was savagely indignant, but a warm and happy glow spread over her as she dried off in a cage near the stove, and her fur began to fluff out with wonderful softness and whiteness. Jap and his assistant were much pleased with the result, and Kitty ought to have been, but this was preparatory. Now for the experiment. "Nothing is so good for growing fur as plenty of oily food and continued exposure to cold weather," said the clipping. Winter was at hand, and Jap Malee put Kitty's cage out in the yard, protected only from the rain and the direct wind, and fed her with all the oil cake and fish heads she could eat. In a week a change began to show. She was rapidly getting fat and sleek. She had nothing to do but get fat and dress her fur. Her cage was kept clean, and nature responded to the chill weather and the oily food by making Kitty's coat thicker and glossier every day, so that by midwinter she was an unusually beautiful cat in the fullest and finest of fur, with markings that were at least a rarity. Jap was much pleased with the result of the experiment, and as a very little success had a wonderful effect on him, he began to dream of the paths of glory. Why not send the slum cat to the show now coming on? The failure of the year before made him more careful as to details. "'Twon't do, Sammy, to henter her as a tramp cat, he observed to his help. "But it can be arranged to suit the Knickerbockers. No thinks like a good noime, You see now it oughter be royal somethin' or other. No think goes with the Knickerbockers like royal anythink. Now, Royal Dick or Royal Sam, 'ow's that? But 'old on, them's Tom names. Oi say, Sammy, what's the noime of that island where ye was born?" "Analostan Island, sah, was my native vicinity, sah." "Oi say, now that's good, Royal Analostan, by Jove, the onliest pedigreed Royal Analostan in the 'ole show, Ain't that foine?" And they mingled their cackles. "But we'll 'ave to 'ave a pedigree, So a very long fake pedigree on the recognized lines was prepared. One dark afternoon Sam, in a borrowed silk hat, delivered the cat and the pedigree at the show door. The darky did the honors. He had been a Sixth Avenue barber, and he could put on more pomp and lofty hauteur than a 5 minutes than Jap could have displayed in a lifetime, and this doubtless was one reason for the respectful reception awarded the Royal Analostan at the cat show. Jap was very proud to be an exhibitor, but he had all a Cockney's reverence for the upper class, and when, on the opening day, he went to the door, he was overpowered to see the array of carriages and silk hats. The gateman looked at him sharply, but passed him on his ticket, doubtless taking him for a stable boy to some exhibitor. The hall had velvet carpets before the long rows of cages. Jap in his small cunning was sneaking down the side rows, glancing at the cats of all kinds, noting the blue ribbons and the reds, peering about but not daring to ask for his own exhibit, inly trembling to think what the gorgeous gathering of fashion would say if they discovered the trick he was playing on them. He had passed all around the outer aisles and seen many prize winners, but no sign of Slum Kitty. The inner aisles were more crowded. He picked his way down them, but still no Kitty, and he decided that it was a mistake. The judges had rejected the cat later. Never mind, he had his exhibitor's ticket, and now knew where several valuable Persians and Angoras were to be found. In the middle of the center aisle were the high-class cats. A great throng was there. The passage was roped, and 2 policemen were in place to keep the crowd moving. Jap wriggled in among them. He was too short to see over, and though the richly gowned folks shrunk from his shabby old clothes, he could not get near. But he gathered from the remarks that the gem of the show was there. "Oh, isn't she a beauty?" said one tall woman. "What distinction!" was the reply. One cannot mistake the air that comes only from ages of the most refined surroundings.
How I should like to own that superb creature!
Such dignity, such repose!
She has an authentic pedigree nearly back to the Pharaohs, I hear."
And poor, dirty little Jap marveled at his own cheek in sending his slum cat into such company.
"Excuse me, madam."
The director of the show now appeared, edging his way through the crowd.
"The artist of the sporting element is here, under orders to sketch the pearl of the show for immediate use. May I ask you to stand a little aside? That's it. Thank you."
"Oh, Mr. Director, cannot you persuade him to sell that beautiful creature?"
I don't know," was the reply. "I understand he is a man of ample means and not at all approachable. But I'll try, madam. He was quite unwilling to exhibit his treasure at all, so I understand from his butler."
"Here, you, keep out of the way!" growled the director as the shabby little man eagerly pushed between the artist and the blue-blooded cat. But the disreputable one wanted to know where valuable cats were to be found. He came near enough to get a glimpse of the cage, and there read a placard which announced that "the blue ribbon and gold medal of the Knickerbocker High Society Cat and Pet Show" had been awarded to the
"Thoroughbred, pedigreed, Royal Analostan, imported and exhibited by J. Maley, Esquire, the well-known fancier. Not for sale."
Jap caught his breath and stared again. Yes, surely, there, high in a gilded cage, on velvet cushions, with 4 policemen for guards, her fur bright black and pale gray, her bluish eyes slightly closed, was his Slum Kitty, looking the picture of a cat bored to death with a lot of fuss that she likes as little as she understands it. Section 7. Jap Maley lingered around that cage, taking in the remarks for hours, drinking a draught of glory such as he had never known in life before and rarely glimpsed in his dreams. But he saw that it would be wise for him to remain unknown. His butler must do all the business. It was Slum Kitty who made that show a success. Each day her value went up in her owner's eyes. He did not know what prices had been given for cats, and thought that he was touching a record pitch when his butler gave the director authority to sell the Analostan for $100. This is how it came about that the Slum Cat found herself transferred from the show to a Fifth Avenue mansion. She evinced a most unaccountable wildness at first. Her objection to petting, however, was explained on the ground of her aristocratic dislike of familiarity. Her retreat from the lapdog onto the center of the dinner table was understood to express a deep-rooted though mistaken idea of avoiding a defiling touch. Her assault on a pet canary were condoned for the reason that in her native Orient she had been used to despotic example. The patrician way in which she would get the cover off a milk can was especially applauded. Her dislike of silk-lined basket and her frequent dashes against the plate-glass windows were easily understood. The basket was too plain, and the plate glass was not used in her royal home. Her spotting of the carpet evidenced her Eastern modes of thought. The failure of her several attempts to catch sparrows in the high-walled backyard was new proof of the royal impotency of her bringing up, while her frequent wallowings in the garbage can were understood to be the manifestation of a little pardonable high-born eccentricity. She was fed and pampered, shown and praised, but she was not happy. Kitty was homesick. She clawed at that blue ribbon round her neck till she got it off. She jumped against the plate glass because that seemed the road to outside. She avoided people and dogs because they had always proved hostile and cruel, and she would sit and gaze on the roofs and the backyards at the other side of the window, wishing she could be among them for a change. But she was strictly watched, never allowed outside, so that all the happy garbage can moments occurred while these receptacles of joy were indoors. One night in March, however, as they were set out a row for the early scavengers, the Royal Analostan saw her chance, slipping out of the door, and was lost to view. Of course there was a grand stir, but Pussy neither knew nor cared anything about that. Her one thought was to go home. It may have been chance that took her back in the direction of Gramercy Grange Hill, but she did arrive there after sundry small adventures. And now what? She was not at home, and she had cut off her living. She was beginning to be hungry, and yet she had a peculiar sense of happiness. She cowered in a front garden for some time. A raw east wind had been rising, and now it came to her with a particularly friendly message. Man would have called it an unpleasant smell of the docks, but to Pussy it was welcome tidings from home. She trotted down the long street due east, threading the rails of front gardens, stopping like a statue for an instant, or crossing the street in search of the darkest side, and came at length to the docks and to the water. But the place was strange. She could go north or south. Something turned her southward, and dodging among docks and dogs, carts and cats, crooked arms of the bay, and straight board fences, she got, in an hour or two, among familiar scenes and smells. And before the sun came up, she had crawled back, weary and footsore, through the same old hole in the same old fence, and over a wall to her junk yard back of the bird cellar. Yes, back into the very cracker box where she was born. Oh, if the Fifth Avenue family could only have seen her in her native Orient! After a long rest she came quietly down from the cracker box toward the steps leading to the cellar, engaged in her old-time pursuit of seeking for eatables. The door opened, and there stood the negro. He shouted to the birdman inside, "Say, boss, come here! Here dere ain't dat Royal Analostan and come back!" Jap came in time to see the cat jumping the wall. They called loudly and in the most seductive, wheedling tones, "Pussy, pussy, pussy, poor pussy! Come, pussy!" But pussy was not prepossessed in their favor, and disappeared to forage in her old-time haunts. The Royal Analostan had been a windfall for Jap, had been the means of adding many comforts to the cellar and several prisoners to the cages. It was now of the utmost importance to recapture her Majesty. Stale meat offal and other infallible lures were put out till Pussy, urged by the reestablished hunger pinch, crept up to a large fish head in a box trap. The negro, in watching, pulled the string that dropped the lid, and a minute later the Analostan was once more among the prisoners in the cellar. Meanwhile Jap had been watching the "Lost and Found" column. There it was, $25 reward, etc. That night Mr. Maylie's butler called at the Fifth Avenue mansion with the missing cat. "Mr. Maylie's compliments, sah. De Royal Analostan had recurred in her recent proprietor's vicinity and residence, sah. Mr. Maylie had pleasure in recuperating the Royal Analostan, sir." Of course Mr. Maylie could not be rewarded, but the butler was open to any offer, and plainly showed that he expected the promised reward and something more. Kitty was guarded very carefully after that, but so far from being disgusted with the old life of starving and glad of her ease, she became wilder and more dissatisfied. Section 8. The spring was doing its New York best. The dirty little English sparrows were tumbling over each other in their gutter brawls. Cats yowled all night in the areas, and the Fifth Avenue family were thinking of their country residence. They packed up, closed house, and moved off to their summer home, some 50 miles away, and Pussy, in a basket, went with them. Just what she needed, a change of air and scene to wean her away from her former owners and make her happy. The basket was lifted into a rumble shaker. New sounds and passing smells were entered and left, and in the turn the course was made. Then a roaring of many feet, more swinging of the basket, a short pause, another change of direction, then some clicks, some bangs, a long, shrill whistle, and doorbells of a very big front door. A rumbling, a whizzing, an unpleasant smell, a hideous smell, a growing, horrible, hateful, choking smell, a deadly, gripping, poisonous stench with roaring that drowned poor Kitty's yowls, and just as it neared the point where endurance ceased, there was relief. She heard clicks and clacks, there was light, there was air. Then a man's voice called, "All out for 125th Street," though of course to Kitty it was a mere human bellow. The roaring almost did cease. Later the rackety bang was renewed with plenty of sounds and shakes, though not the poisonous gas. A long, hollow, booming roar with a pleasant dock smell was quickly passed, and then there was a succession of jolts, roars, jars, stops, clicks, clacks, smells, jumps, shakes, more smells, more shakes, big shakes, little shakes, gases, smokes, screeches, doorbells, tremblings, roars, thunders, and some new smells, raps, taps, heavings, rumblings, and more smells, but all without any of the feel that the direction is changed. When at last it stopped, the sun came twinkling through the basket lid. The royal cat was lifted into a rumble shaker of the old familiar style, and, swerving aside from their past course, very soon the noise of its wheels were gritting and rattlings. A new and horrible sound was added, the barking of dogs, big and little and dreadfully close. The basket was lifted, and Slum Kitty had reached her country home. Everyone was officiously inclined. They wanted to please the royal cat, but somehow none of them did, except possibly the big fat cook that Kitty discovered on wandering into the kitchen. This unctuous person smelt more like a slum than anything she had met for months, and the royal Analostan was proportionately attracted. The cook, when she learned that fears were entertained about the cat staying, said, "Sure, she'd tend to thot. Once a cat licks her first, sure she's at home." So she deftly caught the unapproachable royalty in her apron, and committed the horrible sacrilege of greasing the soles of her feet with pot grease. Of course Kitty resented it. She resented everything in that place. But on being set down she began to dress her paws and found evident satisfaction in that grease. She licked all 4 feet for an hour, and the cook triumphantly announced that now, sure, she'd be apt to stay, and stay she did. But she showed a most surprising and disgusting preference for the kitchen, the cook, and the garbage pail. The family, though distressed by these distinguished peculiarities, were glad to see the royal Analostan more contented and approachable. They gave her more liberty after a week or two. They guarded her from every menace. The dogs were taught to respect her. No man or boy about the place would have dreamed of throwing a stone at the famous pedigreed cat. She had all the food she wanted, but still she was not happy. She was hankering for many things, she scarcely knew what. She had everything. Yes, but she wanted something else. Plenty to eat and drink. Yes, but milk does not taste the same when you can go and drink all you want from a saucer. It has to be stolen out of a tin pail when you are belly pinched with hunger and thirst, or it does not have that tang. It isn't milk. Yes, there was a junk yard back of the house, and beside it and around it too, a big one. But it was everywhere poisoned and polluted with roses. The very horses and dogs had the wrong smell. The whole country round was a repellent desert of lifeless, disgusting gardens and hayfields, without a single tenement or smokestack in sight. How she did hate it all! There was only one sweet-smelling shrub in the whole horrible place, and that was in a neglected corner. She did enjoy nipping that and rolling in the leaves. It was a bright spot in the grounds, but the only one, for she had not found a rotten fish head nor seen a genuine garbage can since she came, and altogether it was the most unlovely, unattractive, unsmellable spot she had ever known. She would surely have gone that first night had she had the liberty. The liberty was weeks in coming, and meanwhile her affinity with the cook had developed as a bond to keep her. But one day, after a summer of discontent, a succession of things happened to stir anew the slum instinct of the royal prisoner. A great bundle of stuff from the docks had reached the country mansion. What it contained was of little moment, but it was rich with a score of the most piquant and winsome of dock and slum smells. The chords of memory surely dwell in the nose, and Pussy's past was conjured up with dangerous force. Next day the cook left through some trouble over this very bundle. It was the cutting of cables, and that evening the youngest boy of the house, a horrid little American with no proper appreciation of royalty, was tying a tin to the blue-blooded one's tail, doubtless in furtherance of some altruistic project, when Pussy resented the liberty with a paw that wore 5 big fish-hooks for the occasion. The howl of down-trodden American roused America's mother. The deft and womanly blow that she aimed with her book was miraculously avoided, and Pussy took flight, upstairs, of course. A hunted rat runs downstairs, a hunted dog goes on the level, a hunted cat runs up. She hid in the garret, baffled discovery, and waited till night came. Then, gliding downstairs, she tried each screen door in turn till she found one unlatched, and escaped into the black August night. Pitch black to man's eyes, it was simply gray to her, and she glided through the disgusting shrubbery and flower beds, took a final nip at that one little bush that had been an attractive spot in the garden, and boldly took her back track of the spring. How could she take a back track that she never saw? There is in all animals some sense of direction. It is very low in man, and very high in horses, but cats have a large gift, and this mysterious guide took her westward, not clearly and definitely, but with a general impulse that was made definite simply because the road was easy to travel. In an hour she had covered 2 miles and reached the Hudson River. Her nose had told her many times that the course was true. Smell after smell came back, just as a man after walking a mile in a strange street may not recall a single feature, but will remember, on seeing it again, "Why, yes, I saw this before." So Kitty's main guide was the sense of direction, but it was her nose that kept reassuring her. "Yes, now you are right. We passed this place last spring." At the river was the railroad. She could not go on the water. She must go north or south. This was a case where her sense of direction was clear. It said, "Go south," and Kitty trotted down the footpath between the iron rails and the fence. End of section 2. Recording by Jenny Blankenship, Culloden, West Virginia. Section 3 of Animal Heroes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Jenny Blankenship, Culloden, West Virginia. Animal Heroes by Ernest Thompson Seton. Life 3. Section 9. Cats can go very fast up a tree or over a wall, but when it comes to the long, steady trot that reels off mile after mile, hour after hour, it is not the cat hop, but the dog trot that counts. Although the traveling was good and the path direct, an hour had gone before 2 more miles were put between her and the Hades of roses. She was tired and a little footsore. She was thinking of rest when a dog came running to the fence near by and broke out into such a horrible barking close to her ear that Pussy leaped in terror. She ran as hard as she could down the path, at the same time watching to see if the dog should succeed in passing the fence. No, not yet, but he ran close by it, growling horribly, while Pussy skipped along on the safe side. The barking of the dog grew into a low rumble, a louder rumble, and roaring, a terrifying thunder. A light shone. Kitty glanced back to see, not the dog, but a huge black thing with a blazing red eye coming on, yowling and spitting like a yard full of cats. She put forth all her powers to run, made such time as she had never made before, but dared not leap the fence. She was running like a dog, was flying, but all in vain. The monstrous pursuer overtook her, but missed her in the darkness and hurried past to be lost in the night, while Kitty crouched, gasping for breath, half a mile nearer home since the dog began to bark. This was her first encounter with the strange monster. Strange to her eyes only. Her nose seemed to know him and told her that this was another landmark on the home trail. But Pussy lost much of her fear of his kind. She learned that they were very stupid and could not find her if she slipped quietly under a fence and lay still. Before morning she had encountered several of them, but escaped unharmed from all. About sunrise she reached a nice little slum on her home trail, and was lucky enough to find several unsterilized eatables in an ash heap. She spent the day around a stable where were 2 dogs and a number of small boys that between them came near ending her career. It was so very like home, but she had no idea of staying there. She was driven by the old craving, and next evening set out as before. She had seen the one-eyed thunder rollers all day going by, and was getting used to them, so traveled steadily all the night. The next day was spent in a barn where she caught a mouse, and the next night was like the last, except that a dog she encountered drove her backward on her trail for a long way. Several times she was misled by angling roads, and wandered far astray, but in time she wandered back again to her general southward course. The days were passing in skulking under barns and hiding from dogs and small boys, and the nights in limping along the track, for she was getting footsore. But on she went, mile after mile, southward, ever southward. Dogs, boys, roarers, hunger, dogs, boys, roarers, hunger, yet on and onward still she went, and her nose from time to time cheered her by confidently reporting, "There surely is a smell we passed last spring." Section 10. So a week went by, and Pussy, dirty, ribbonless, footsore, and weary, arrived at the Harlem Bridge. Though it was enveloped in delicious smells, she did not like the look of that bridge. For half the night she wandered up and down the shore without discovering any other means of going south, excepting some other bridges, or anything of interest except that here the men were as dangerous as the boys. Somehow she had come back to it. Not only its smells were familiar, but from time to time when a one-eye ran over it, there was that peculiar rumbling roar that was a sensation in the springtime trip. The calm of the late night was abroad when she leapt to the timber stringer and glided out over the water. She had got less than a third of the way across when a thundering one-eye came roaring at her from the opposite end. She was much frightened, but knowing their stupidity and blindness, she dropped to a low side beam and there crouched in hiding. Of course the stupid monster missed her and passed on, and all would have been well, but it turned back, or another just like it came suddenly spitting behind her. Pussy leaped to the long track and made for the home shore. She might have got there had not a third of the red-eye terrors come screeching at her from that side. She was running her hardest, but was caught between 2 foes. There was nothing for it but a desperate leap from the timbers into she didn't know what. Down, 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 plop, splash, plunge into the deep water, not cold, for it was August, but Oh, so horrible! She spluttered and coughed when she came to the top, glanced around to see if the monsters were swimming after her, and struck out for shore. She had never learned to swim, and yet she swam, for the simple reason that a cat's position and actions in swimming are the same as her position and actions in walking. She had fallen into a place she did not like. Naturally, she tried to walk out, and the result was she swam ashore. Which shore? The home love never fails. The south side was the only shore for her, the one nearest home. She scrambled out, all dripping wet, up the muddy bank and through coal piles and dust heaps, looking as black, dirty, and unroyal as it was possible for a cat to look. Once the shock was over, the royal pedigreed slummer began to feel better for the plunge. A genial glow without from the bath, a genial sense of triumph within, for had she not outwitted 3 of the big terrors? Her nose, her memory, and her instinct of direction inclined her to get on the track again, but the place was infested with those thunder rollers, and prudence led her to turn aside and follow the river bank with its musky home reminders, and thus she was spared the unspeakable horrors of the tunnel. She was over 3 days learning the manifold dangers and complexities of the East River docks. Once she got by mistake on a ferry boat and was carried over to Long Island, but she took an early boat back. At length, on the 3rd night, she reached familiar ground, the place she had passed the night of her first escape. From that her course was sure and rapid. She knew just where she was going and how to get there. She knew even the more prominent features in the dogscape now. She went faster, felt happier. In a little while, surely, she would be curled up in her native Orient, the old junkyard. Another turn, and the block was in sight. But what? It was gone! Kitty couldn't believe her eyes, but she must, for the sun was not yet up. There, where once had stood or leaned or slouched or straggled the houses of the block, was a great broken wilderness of stone, lumber, and holes in the ground. Kitty walked all around it. She knew by the bearings and by the local color of the pavement that she was in her home, that there had lived the birdman, and there was the old junkyard, but all were gone, completely gone, taking their familiar odors with them, and Pussy turned sick at heart in the utter hopelessness of the case. Her place love was her master mood. She had given up all to come to a home that no longer existed, and for once her sturdy little heart was cast down. She wandered over the silent heaps of rubbish and found neither consolation nor eatables. The ruin had taken in several of the blocks and reached back from the water. It was not a fire. Kitty had seen one of those. This looked more like the work of a flock of the red-eyed monsters. Pussy knew nothing of the great bridge that was to rise from this very spot. When the sun came up she sought for cover. An adjoining block still stood with little change, and the Royal Analostan retired to that. She knew some of its trails, but once there was unpleasantly surprised to find the place swarming with cats that, like herself, were driven from their old grounds, and when the garbage cans came out there were several slummers at each. It meant a famine in the land, and Pussy, after standing it a few days, was reduced to seeking out her other home on Fifth Avenue. She got there to find it shut up and deserted. She waited for about a day, had an unpleasant experience with a big man in a blue coat, and next night returned to the clouded slum. September and October wore away. Many of the cats died of starvation or were too weak to escape their natural enemies, but Kitty, young and strong, still lived. Great changes had come over the ruined block. Though silent on the night when she first saw them, they were crowded with the noisy workmen all day. A tall building, well advanced on her arrival, was completed at the end of October, and Slum Kitty, driven by hunger, went sneaking up to a pail that a negro had set outside. The pail, unfortunately, was not for garbage. It was a new thing in that region, a scrubbing pail. A sad disappointment, but it had a sense of comfort. There were traces of a familiar touch on the handle. While she was studying it, the negro elevator boy came out again. In spite of his blue clothes, his odorous person confirmed the good impression of the handle. Kitty had retreated across the street. He gazed at her. "Sho if dat don't look like de Royal Analostan. Here, you pussy, pussy, pussy. Come, pussy, here. I 'spect she's sho hungry." Hungry? She hadn't had a real meal for months. The negro went into the building and reappeared with a portion of his own lunch. "Hyar, pussy, puss, puss, puss." It seemed very good, but Pussy had her doubts of the man. At length he laid the meat on the pavement and went back to the door. Slum Kitty came forward very warily, sniffed at the meat, seized it, and fled like a little tigress to eat her prize in peace. Section 11. This was the beginning of a new era. Pussy came to the door of the building now whenever pinched by hunger, and the good feeling for the negro grew. She had never understood that man before. He had always seemed hostile. Now he was her friend, the only one she had. One week she had a streak of luck. 7 good meals on 7 successive days, and right on the top of the last meal she found a juicy dead rat, the genuine thing, a perfect windfall. She had never killed a full-grown rat in all her lives, but seized the prize and ran off to hide it for future use. She was crossing the street in front of the new building when an old enemy appeared, the wharf dog, and Kitty retreated naturally enough to the door where she had a friend. Just as she neared it, he opened the door for a well-dressed man to come out, and both saw the cat with her prize. "Hello! Look at that for a cat!" "Yes, sah," answered the negro. "Dat's my cat, sah. She a terror on rats, sah. He's 'em about cleaned up, sah. Dat's why she's so thin." "Well, don't let her starve," said the man with the air of the landlord. "Can't you feed her?" "De liver meat man come regular, sah. $25 a week, sah," said the negro, fully realizing that he was entitled to the extra 15 cents for the idea. "That's all right. I'll stand it." Section 12. "Meat, meat," is heard the magnetic cat-conjuring cry of the old liverman as his barrow is pushed up the glorified Scrimper's Alley, and cats come crowding as of yore to receive their due. There are cats, black, white, yellow, and gray to be remembered, and above all there are owners to be remembered. As the barrow rounds the corner near the new building, it makes a newly scheduled stop. "Har, you, get out of the road, you common trash!" cries the liverman, and he waves his wand to make way for the little gray cat with blue eyes and white nose. She receives an unusually large portion, for Sam is wisely dividing the returns evenly, and Slum Kitty retreats with her daily into shelter of the great building, to which she is regularly attached. She has entered into her 4th life with prospects of happiness never before dreamed of. Everything was against her at first. Now everything seemed to be coming her way. It is very doubtful that her mind was broadened by travel, but she knew what she wanted, and she got it. She has achieved her lifelong great ambition by catching not a sparrow, but 2 of them, while they were clinched in mortal combat in the gutter. There is no reason to suppose that she ever caught another rat, but the negro secures a dead one when he can for purposes of exhibition, lest her pension be imperiled. The dead one is left in the hall till the proprietor comes. Then it is apologetically swept away. "Well, drat dat cat, sah. Dat Royal Ankylosin blood, sah, is terrors on rats." She has had several broods since. The negro thinks the yellow Tom is the father of some of them, and no doubt the negro is right. He has sold her a number of times with a perfectly clear conscience, knowing quite well that it is only a question of a few days before the Royal Analostan comes back again. Doubtless he is saving the money for some honorable ambition. She has learned to tolerate the elevator, and even to ride up and down on it. The negro stoutly maintains that once when he heard the meat man, while she was on the top floor, she managed to press the button that called the elevator to take her down. She is sleek and beautiful again. She is not only one of the 400 that form the inner circle about the liver barrow, but she is recognized as the star pensioner among them. The liver man is positively respectful. Not even the cream and chicken fed cat of the pawnbroker's wife has such a position as the royal Anne Austen. But in spite of her prosperity, her social position, her royal name and fake pedigree, the greatest pleasure of her life is to slip out and go a slumming in the gloaming, for now, as in her previous lives, she is at heart, and likely to be, nothing but a dirty little slum cat. End of section 3. Recorded by Jenny Blankenship, Culloden, West Virginia.
Section 4 of Animal Heroes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steph Hamilton. Animal Heroes by Ernest Thompson Seton. Arno, the Chronicle of a Homing Pigeon. We passed through the side door of a big stable on West 19th Street. The mild smell of the well-kept stalls was lost in the sweet odor of hay as we mounted a ladder and entered the long garret. The south end was walled off, and the familiar coo, coo, rook-a-da-coo, varied with the whir, whir, whir of wings, informed us that we were at the pigeon loft. This was the home of a famous lot of birds, and today there was to be a race among 50 of the youngsters. The owner of the loft had asked me, as an unprejudiced outsider, to be judge in the contest. It was a training race of the young birds. They had been taken out for short distances with their parents once or twice, then set free to return to the loft. Now for the first time they were to be flown without the old ones. The point of start, Elizabeth, New Jersey, was a long journey for the first unaided attempt. But then, the trainer remarked, that's how we weed out the fools. Only the best birds make it, and that's all we want back. There was another side to the flight. It was to be a race among those that did return. Each of the men about the loft, as well as several neighboring fanciers, were interested in one or other of the homers. They made up a purse for the winner, and on me was to devolve the important duty of deciding which should take the stakes. Not the first bird back, but the first bird into the loft was to win. For one that returns to his neighborhood merely, without immediately reporting at home, is of little use as a letter carrier. The homing pigeon used to be called the carrier because it carried messages, but here I found that name restricted to the showbird, the creature with absurdly developed wattles. The one that carries the message is now called the homer, or homing pigeon, the bird that always comes home. These pigeons are not of any special color, nor have they any of the fancy adornments of the kind that figure in bird shows. They are not bred for style, but for speed, and for their mental gifts. They must be true to their home, able to return to it without fail. The sense of direction is now believed to be located in the bony labyrinth of the ear. There is no creature with finer sense of locality and direction than a good homer, and the only visible proofs of it are the great bulge on each side of the head over the ears, and the superb wings that complete his equipment to obey the noble impulse of home love. Now the mental and physical equipments of the last lot of young birds were to be put to test. Although there were plenty of witnesses, I thought it best to close all but one of the pigeon doors and stand ready to shut that behind the first arrival. I shall never forget the sensations of that day. I had been warned. They start at 12. They should be here at 12:30, but look out. They come like a whirlwind. You hardly see them till they're in. We were ranged along the inside of the loft, each with an eye to a crack or a partly closed pigeon door, anxiously scanning the southwestern horizon, when one shouted, "Look out! Here they come!" Like a white cloud they burst into view, low skimming over the city roofs, around a great chimney pile, and in 2 seconds after first being seen they were back. The flash of white, the rush of pinions were all so sudden, so short, that though preparing I was unprepared. I was at the only open door, A whistling arrow of blue shot in, lashed my face with its pinions, and passed. I had hardly time to drop the little door as a yell burst from the men. "Arno! Arno! I told you he would! Oh, he's a darling! Only 3 months old and a winner! He's a little darling!" And Arno's owner danced, more for joy in his bird than in the purse he had won. The men sat or kneeled and watched him in positive reverence as he gulped a quantity of water, then turned to the food trough. "Look at that eye, those wings, and did you ever see such a breast? Oh, but he's the real grit!" So his owner prattled to the silent ones whose birds had been defeated. That was the first of Arno's exploits. Best of 50 birds from a good loft, his future was bright with promise. He was invested with the silver anklet of the Sacred Order of the High Homer. It bore his number, 2590C, a number which today means much to all men in the world of the homing pigeon. In that trial flight from Elizabeth, only 40 birds had returned. It is usually so. Some were weak and got left behind, some were foolish and strayed. By this simple process of flight selection, the pigeon owners keep improving their stock. Of the 10, 5 were seen no more, but 5 returned later that day, not all at once, but straggling in. The last of the loiterers was a big, lubberly blue pigeon. The man in the loft at the time called, "Here comes that old sap-headed blue that Jakey was betting on. I didn't suppose he would come back, and I didn't care neither, for it's my belief he has a streak of powder." The big blue, also called corner box from the nest where he was hatched, had shown remarkable vigor from the first. Though all were about the same age, he had grown faster, was bigger, and incidentally handsomer, though the fanciers cared little for that. He seemed fully aware of his importance, and early showed a disposition to bully his smaller cousins. His owner prophesied great things of him, but Billy, the stableman, had grave doubts over the length of his neck, the bigness of his crop, his carriage, and his oversize. "A bird can't make time pushing a bag of wind ahead of him. Them long legs is dead weight, and a neck like that ain't got no gimp in it," Billy would grunt disparagingly as he cleaned out the loft of a morning. 2. The training of the birds went on after this at regular times. The distance from home, of the start, was jumped 25 or 30 miles farther each day, and its direction changed till the homers knew the country for 150 miles around New York. The original 50 birds dwindled to 20, for the rigid process weeds out not only the weak and ill-equipped, but those also who may have temporary ailments or accidents, or who may make the mistake of overeating at the start. There were many fine birds in that flight, broad-breasted, bright-eyed, long-winged creatures, formed for swiftest flight, for high unconscious emprise, for these were destined to be messengers in the service of man in times of serious need. Their colors were mostly white, blue, or brown. They wore no uniform, but each and all of the chosen remnant had the brilliant eye and the bulging ears of the finest Homer blood, and, best and choicest of all, nearly always first among them, was little Arno. He had not much to distinguish him when at rest, for now all of the band had the silver anklet, but in the air it was that Arno showed his make, and when the opening of the hamper gave the order, "Start!" it was Arno that first got under way, soared to the height deemed needful to exclude all local influence, divined the road to home, and took it, pausing not for food, drink, or company. Notwithstanding Billy's evil forecast, the big blue of the corner box was one of the chosen 20. Often he was late in returning. He was never first, and sometimes when he came back hours behind the rest, it was plain that he was neither hungry nor thirsty, sure signs that he was a loiterer by the way. Still he had come back, and now he wore on his ankle, like the rest, the sacred badge and a number from the roll of possible fame. Billy despised him, set him in poor contrast with Arno, but his owner would reply, "Give him a chance. Soon ripe, soon rotten, and I always notice the best bird is the slowest to show up at first." Before a year little Arno had made a record. The hardest of all work is over the sea, for there is no chance of aid from landmarks, and the hardest of all times at sea is in fog, for then even the sun is blotted out, and there is nothing whatever for guidance. With memory, sight, and hearing unavailable, the Homer has one thing left, and herein is his great strength, the inborn sense of direction. There is only one thing that can destroy this, and that is fear, hence the necessity of a stout little heart between those noble wings. Arnaud, with 2 of his order, in course of training, had been shipped on an ocean steamer bound for Europe. They were to be released out of sight of land, but a heavy fog set in and forbade the start. The steamer took them onward, the intention being to send them back with the next vessel. When 10 hours out, the engine broke down, the fog settled dense over the sea, and the vessel was adrift and helpless as a log. She could only whistle for assistance, and so far as results were concerned, the captain might as well have wigwagged. Then the pigeons were thought of. Starback, 2592C, was first selected. A message for help was written on waterproof paper, rolled up and lashed to his tail feathers on the underside. He was thrown into the air and disappeared. Half an hour later, a second, the big blue corner box 2600C, was freighted with a letter. He flew up, but almost immediately returned, and alighted on the rigging. He was a picture of pigeon fear. Nothing could induce him to leave the ship. He was so terrorized that he was easily caught and ignominiously thrust back into the coop. Now the third was brought out, a small, chunky bird. The shipmen did not know him, but they noted down from his anklet the name and number, Arnaud, 2590C. It meant nothing to them, but the officer who held him noted that his heart did not beat so wildly as that of the last bird. The message was taken from the Big Blue. It ran, 10 a.m. Tuesday. We broke our shaft 210 miles out from New York. We are drifting helplessly in the fog. Send out a tug as soon as possible. We are whistling 1 long, followed at once by 1 short, every 60 seconds. Signed, the captain. This was rolled up, wrapped in waterproof film, addressed to the steamship company, and lashed to the underside of Arnaud's middle tail feather. When thrown into the air, he circled round the ship, then round again higher in a wider circle, and he was lost to view, and still higher, till quite out of sight and feeling of the ship. Shut out from the use of all his senses now but one, he gave himself up to that. Strong in him it was, and untrammeled of that murderous despot fear. True as a needle to the pole went Arnaud now, no hesitation, no doubts. Within 1 minute of leaving the coop, he was speeding straight as a ray of light for the loft where he was born, the only place on earth where he could be made content. That afternoon Billy was on duty when the whistle of fast wings was heard. A blue flyer flashed into the loft and made for the water trough. He was gulping down mouthful after mouthful when Billy gasped, "Why, Arnaud, it's you, you beauty!" Then, with the quick habit of the pigeon man, he pulled out his watch and marked the time. 2:40 p.m. A glance showed the tie string on the tail. He shut the door and dropped the catching net quickly over Arnaud's head. A moment later he had the roll in his hand. In 2 minutes he was speeding to the office of the company, for there was a fat tip in view. There he learned that Arnaud had made the 210 miles in fog over sea in 4 hours and 40 minutes, and within 1 hour the needful help had set out for the unfortunate steamer. 210 miles in fog over sea in 4 hours and 40 minutes. This was a noble record. It was duly inscribed in the rolls of the Homing Club. Arnaud was held while the secretary, with rubber stamp and indelible ink, printed on a snowy primary of his right wing the record of the feat, with the date and reference number. Starback, the second bird, was never heard of again. No doubt he perished at sea. Blue corner box came back on the tug. End of section 4. Section 5 of Animal Heroes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Steph Hamilton. Animal Heroes by Ernest Thompson Seton. Arnaud, The Chronicle of a Homing Pigeon. 3. That was Arnaud's first public record, but others came fast, and several curious scenes were enacted in that old pigeon loft with Arnaud as the central figure. One day a carriage drove up to the stable, a white-haired gentleman got out, climbed the dusty stairs, and sat all morning in the loft with Billy, peering from his gold-rimmed glasses, first at a lot of papers, next across the roofs of the city, waiting, watching. For what? News from a little place not 40 miles away, news of greatest weight to him, tidings that would make or break him, tidings that must reach him before it could be telegraphed. A telegram meant at least an hour's delay at each end. What was faster than that for 40 miles? In those days there was but one thing, a high-class Homer. Money would count for nothing if he could win. The best, the very best at any price he must have, and Arno, with 7 indelible records on his pinions, was the chosen messenger. An hour went by, another, a third was begun, when the whistle of wings, the blue meteor, flashed into the loft. Billy slammed the door and caught him. Deftly he snipped the threads and handed the roll to the banker. The old man turned deathly pale, fumbled it open. Then his color came back. "Thank God!" he gasped, and then went speeding to his board meeting, master of the situation. Little Arno had saved him. The banker wanted to buy the Homer, feeling in a vague way that he ought to honor and cherish him, but Billy was very clear about it. "What's the good? You can't buy a Homer's heart. You could keep him a prisoner, that's all, but nothing on earth could make him forsake the old loft where he was hatched." So Arno stayed at 211 West 19th Street, but the banker did not forget. There is in our country a class of miscreants who think a flying pigeon is fair game, because it is probably far from home, or they shoot him because it is hard to fix the crime. Many a noble Homer, speeding with a life-or-death message, has been shot down by one of these wretches and remorselessly made into a pot pie. Arno's brother Arnulf, with 3 fine records on his wings, was thus murdered in the act of bearing a hasty summons for the doctor. As he fell dying at the gunner's feet, his superb wings spread out displayed his list of victories. The silver badge on his leg was there, and the gunner was smitten with remorse. He had the message sent on. He returned the dead bird to the homing club, saying that he found it. The owner came to see him. The gunner broke down under cross-examination and was forced to admit that he himself had shot the Homer, but did so in behalf of a poor sick neighbor who craved a pigeon pie. There were tears in the wrath of the pigeon man. "My bird, my beautiful Arnulf! 20 times has he brought vital messages, 3 times has he made records. Twice has he saved human lives, and you'd shoot him for a pot pie. I could punish you under the law, but I have no heart for such a poor revenge. I only ask you this. If ever again you have a sick neighbor who wants a pigeon pie, come, we'll freely supply him with pie-breed squabs. But if you have a trace of manhood about you, you will never, never again shoot or allow others to shoot our noble and priceless messengers." This took place while the banker was in touch with the loft, while his heart was warm for the pigeons. He was a man of influence, and the pigeon protective legislation at Albany was the immediate fruit of Arno's exploit. 4. Billy had never liked the corner box blue 2600C, notwithstanding the fact that he still continued in the ranks of the silver badge. Billy believed he was poor stuff. The steamer incident seemed to prove him coward. He certainly was a bully. One morning when Billy went in there was a row, 2 pigeons, a large and a small, alternately clinching and sparring all over the floor, feathers flying, dust and commotion everywhere. As soon as they were separated, Billy found that the little one was Arno, and the big one was the corner box blue. Arno had made a good fight, but was overmatched, for the big blue was half as heavy again. Soon it was very clear what they had fought over, a pretty little lady pigeon of the bluest homing blood. The big blue cock had kept up a state of bad feeling by his bullying, but it was the little lady that had made them close in mortal combat. Billy had no authority to wring the big blue's neck, but he interfered as far as he could in behalf of his favorite, Arno. Pigeon marriages are arranged somewhat like those of mankind. Propinquity is the first thing. Force the pair together for a time, and let nature take its course. So Billy locked Arno and the little lady up together in a separate apartment for 2 weeks, and to make doubly sure, he locked Big Blue up with an available lady in another apartment for 2 weeks. Things turned out just as was expected. The little lady surrendered to Arno, and the available lady to the Big Blue. 2 nests were begun, and everything shaped for a lived happily ever after. But the Big Blue was very big and handsome, He could blow out his crop and strut in the sun and make rainbows all round his neck in a way that might turn the heart of the statist Homerine. Arno, though sturdily built, was small and, except for his brilliant eyes, not especially good-looking. Moreover, he was often away on important business, and the Big Blue had nothing to do but stay around the loft and display his unlettered wings. It is the custom of moralists to point to the lower animals, and especially to the pigeon, for examples of love and constancy, and properly so, but alas, there are exceptions. Vice is not by any means limited to the human race. Arno's wife had been deeply impressed with the Big Blue at the outset, and at length, while her spouse was absent, the dreadful thing took place. Arno returned from Boston one day to find that the Big Blue, while he retained his own available lady in the corner box, had also annexed the box and wife that belonged to himself, and a desperate battle followed. The only spectators were the two wives, but they maintained an indifferent aloofness. Arno fought with his famous wings, but they were none the better weapons because they now bore 20 records. His beak and feet were small, as became his blood, and his stout little heart could not make up for his lack of weight. The battle went against him. His wife sat unconcernedly in the nest, as though it were not her affair, and Arno might have been killed but for the timely arrival of Billy. He was angry enough to wring the blue bird's neck, but the bully escaped from the loft in time. Billy took tender care of Arno for a few days. At the end of a week he was well again, and in 10 days he was once more on the road. Meanwhile he had evidently forgiven his faithless wife, for, without any apparent feeling, he took up his nesting as before. That month he made 2 new records. He brought a message 10 miles in 8 minutes, and he came from Boston in 4 hours. Every moment of the way he had been impelled by the master passion of home love. But it was a poor homecoming if his wife figured at all in his thoughts, for he found her again flirting with the big blue cock. Tired as he was, the duel was renewed, and again would have been to a finish but for Billy's interference. He separated the fighters, then shut the blue cock up in a coop, determined to get rid of him in some way. Meanwhile, the Any Age Sweepstakes handicap from Chicago to New York was on, a race of 900 miles. Arno had been entered 6 months before. His forfeit money was up, and notwithstanding his domestic complications, his friends felt that he must not fail to appear. The birds were sent by train to Chicago, to be liberated at intervals there according to their handicap, and last of the start was Arno. They lost no time, and outside of Chicago several of these prime flyers joined by common impulse into a racing flock that went through air on the same invisible track. A homer may make a straight line when following his general sense of direction, but when following a familiar back track, he sticks to the well-remembered landmarks. Most of the birds had been trained by way of Columbus and Buffalo. Arno knew the Columbus route, but also he knew that by Detroit, and after leaving Lake Michigan he took the straight line for Detroit. Thus he caught up on his handicap and had the advantage of many miles. Detroit, Buffalo, Rochester, with their familiar towers and chimneys, faded behind him, and Syracuse was near at hand. It was now late afternoon. 600 miles in 12 hours he had flown, and was undoubtedly leading the race. But the usual thirst of the flyer had attacked him. Skimming over the city roofs, he saw a loft of pigeons, and descending from his high course in 2 or 3 great circles, he followed the ingoing birds to the loft and drank greedily at the water trough, as he had often done before, and as every pigeon lover hospitably expects the messengers to do. The owner of the loft was there, and noted the strange bird. He stepped quietly to where he could inspect him. One of his own pigeons made momentary opposition to the stranger, and Arno, sparring sidewise with an open wing in pigeon style, displayed the long array of printed records. The man was a fancier. His interest was aroused. He pulled the string that shut the flying door, and in a few minutes Arno was his prisoner. The robber spread the much inscribed wings, read record after record, and glancing at the silver badge, it should have been gold, he read his name, Arno, then exclaimed, "Arno! Arno! Oh, I've heard of you, you little beauty, and it's glad I am to trap you." He snipped the message from his tail, unrolled it, and read, "Arno left Chicago this morning at 4 a.m., scratched in the Any Age Sweepstakes for New York. 600 miles in 12 hours. By the powers, that's a record breaker." And the pigeon stealer gently, almost reverently, put the fluttering bird safely into a padded cage. "Well," he added, I know it's no use trying to make you stay, but I can breed from you and have some of your strain." So Arno was shut up in a large and comfortable loft with several other prisoners. The man, though a thief, was a lover of Homer's. He gave his captive everything that could ensure his comfort and safety. For 3 months he left him in that loft. At first Arno did nothing all day but walk up and down the wire screen, looking high and low for means of escape, but in the 4th month he seemed to have abandoned the attempt, and the watchful jailer began the second part of his scheme. He introduced a coy young lady pigeon, but it did not seem to answer. Arno was not even civil to her. After a time the jailer removed the female, and Arno was left in solitary confinement for a month. Now a different female was brought in, but with no better luck, and thus it went on. For a year different charmers were introduced. Arno either violently repelled them or was scornfully indifferent, and at times the old longing to get away came back with twofold power, so that he darted up and down the wire front or dashed with all his force against it. When the storied feathers of his wings began their annual molt, his jailer saved them as precious things, and as each new feather came he reproduced on it the record of its owner's fame. 2 years went slowly by, and the jailer had put Arno in a new loft and brought in another lady pigeon. By chance she closely resembled the faithless one at home, and Arno actually heeded the newcomer. Once the jailer thought he saw his famous prisoner paying some slight attention to the charmer, and yes, he surely saw her preparing a nest. Then, assuming that they had reached a full understanding, the jailer, for the first time, opened the outlet, and Arno was free. Did he hang around in doubt? Did he hesitate? No, not for one moment. As soon as the drop of the door left open the way, he shot through, spread those wonderful blazoned wings, and with no second thought for the last Circe, sprang from the hated prison loft, away and away. 5. We have no means of looking into the pigeon's mind. We may go wrong in conjuring up for it deep thoughts of love and welcome home, but we are safe in this. We cannot too strongly paint. We cannot too highly praise and glorify that wonderful God-implanted, mankind-fostered home-love that glows unquenchably in this noble bird. Call it what you like, a mere instinct deliberately constructed by man for his selfish ends. Explain it away if you will, dissect it, misname it, and it still is there, an overwhelming, imperishable master-power, as long as the brave little heart and wings can beat. Home, home sweet home. Never had mankind a stronger love of home than Arno. The trials and sorrows of the old pigeon loft were forgotten in that all-dominating force of his nature. Not years of prison bars, not later loves, nor fear of death could down its power. And Arno, had the gift of song been his, must surely have sung as sings a hero in his highest joy, when sprang he from the lightning board, up circling free, soaring, drawn by the only impulse that those glorious wings would honor, up, in widening, heightening circles of ashy blue in the blue, flashing those many-lettered wings of white, till they seemed like jets of fire, up and on, driven by that home-love, faithful to his only home and to his faithless mate, closing his eyes, they say, closing his ears, they tell, shutting his mind, we all believe, to nearer things, to 2 years of his life, to 1/2 of his prime, but soaring in the blue, retiring, as a saint might do, into his inner self, giving himself up to that inmost guide. He was the captain of the ship, but the pilot, the chart and compass, all, were that deep implanted instinct. 1,000 feet above the trees the inscrutable whisper came, and Arno, in arrowy swiftness now, was pointing for the south-southeast. The little flashes of white fire on each side were lost in the low sky, and the reverent robber of Syracuse saw Arno nevermore. The fast express was steaming down the valley. It was far ahead, but Arno overtook and passed it, as the flying wild duck passes the swimming muskrat. High in the valleys he went, low over the hills of Chenango, where the pines were combing the breezes. Out from his oak tree eyrie a hawk came wheeling and sailing, silent, for he had marked the flyer, and meant him for his prey. Arno turned neither right nor left, nor raised nor lowered his flight, nor lost a wing beat. The hawk was in waiting in the gap ahead, and Arno passed him, even as a deer in his prime may pass a bear in his pathway. Home, home, was the only burning thought, the blinding impulse. Beat, 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 those flashing pinions went with speed unslacked on the now familiar road. In an hour the Catskills were at hand. In 2 hours he was passing over them. Old friendly places, swiftly coming now, lent more force to his wings. Home, home, was the silent song that his heart was singing. Like the traveler dying of thirst that sees the palm trees far ahead, his brilliant eyes took in the distant smoke of Manhattan. Out from the crest of the Catskills there launched a falcon, swiftest of the race of rapine. Proud of his strength, proud of his wings, he rejoiced in a worthy prey. Many and many a pigeon had been borne to his nest, and riding the wind he came, swooping, reserving his strength, awaiting the proper time. Oh, how well he knew that very moment! Down, down, like a flashing javelin. No wild duck, no hawk could elude him, for this was a falcon. Turn back now, O Homer, and save yourself. Go round the dangerous hills. Did he turn? Not a whit, for this was Arno. Home, 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 was his only thought. To meet the danger, he merely added to his speed, and the peregrine stooped. Stooped at what? A flashing of color, a twinkling of whiteness, and went back empty, while Arno cleft the air of the valley as a stone from a sling, to be lost. A white-winged bird, a spot with flashing halo, and quickly a speck in the offing. On down the dear valley of Hudson, the well-known highway. For 2 years he had not seen it. Now he dropped low as the noon breeze came north and ruffled the river below him. Home, home, home! And the towers of a city are coming in view. Home, home! Past the great spider bridge of Poughkeepsie, skimming, skirting the river banks. Low now by the bank as the wind arose. Low, alas, too low! What fiend was it tempted a gunner in June to lurk on that hill by the margin? What devil directed his gaze to the twinkling of white that came from the blue to the northward? Oh, Arno, Arno, skimming low, forget not the gunner of old. Too low you were clearing that hill. Too low, too late. Flash, bang! And the death hail has reached him, reached, maimed, but not downed him. Out of the flashing pinions broken feathers printed with records went fluttering earthward. The knot of his sea record was gone. Not 210, but 21 miles now it read. Oh, shameful pillage! A dark stain appeared on the bosom, but Arno kept on. Home, home, homeward bound. The danger was past in an instant. Home, homeward he steered, straight as before. But the wonderful speed was diminished, not a mile a minute now. And the wind made undue sounds in his tattered pinions. The stain in his breast told of broken force, but on, straight on he flew. Home, home was in sight, and the pain in his breast was forgotten. The tall towers of the city were in clear view of his far-seeing eye as he skimmed by the high cliffs of Jersey. On, on! The pinion might flag, the eye might darken, but the home love was stronger and stronger. Under the tall palisades, to be screened from the wind, he passed over the sparkling water, over the trees, under the peregrine's eyrie, under the pirate's castle where the great grim peregrines sat, peered like black-masked highwaymen. They marked the oncoming pigeon. Arno knew them of old. Many a message was lying undelivered in that nest. Many a record-bearing plume had fluttered away from its fastness. But Arno had faced them before, and now he came as before, on, onward, swift, but not as he had been. The deadly gun had sapped his force, had lowered his speed. On, and the peregrines, biding their time, went forth like 2 bow bolts, strong and lightning swift. They went against one weak and wearied. Why tell of the race that followed? Why paint the despair of a brave little heart in sight of the home he had craved in vain? In a minute all was over. The peregrines screeched in their triumph. Screeching and sailing, they swung to the eyrie, and the prey in their claws was the body, the last of the bright little Arno. There on the rocks the beaks and claws of the bandit were red with the life of the hero. Torn asunder were those matchless wings, and their records were scattered unnoticed. In sun and in storm they lay, till the killers themselves were killed, and their stronghold rifled. And none knew the fate of the peerless bird, till deep in the dust and rubbish of that pirate nest the avenger found, among others of its kind, a silver ring, the sacred badge of the high Homer, and read upon it the pregnant inscription, Arno, 2590 C. End of section 5.